The 6th of August, 1945. Tokyo holds its breath in a thin, bright hush. A laboratory bench waits under hard light paper, aligned like parade ranks. A pencil moves in, even strokes. A relay ticks once each second, an obedient metronome that makes the air feel square. The survey meter's needle rests at ease, the room a small republic of control. Breath in, hold, breath out. Yoshio Nishina listens for the old comfort of coils, warming the soft hum that means the world will submit to measurement. Footsteps strike tile fast with heat. A message, one bomber over the Ota River, a light that was not fire, a column straight as a mast. He clamps fresh chart paper, steadies his hand, lowers the probe. The needle lifts. A harsh electrical rasp tears across the counterhead dry and saw like the sound of charge breaking silence. Clicks collapse into a near-continuous scrape as counts race the scale. He taps the glass as if etiquette can be restored by touch. The rasp thickens. Heart rate slips, its calm groove, and climbs in short, stubborn steps. He tries to write while the numbers outrun him. Columns smear into slashes. Another line from the field arrives late and merciless, a stair shadow burned into stone steps, a person reduced to the boundary where light ended. Ozone nips his nose. The paper mask sticks to his cheek. Ash grit lives on his fingertips from the envelope. He brings a second meter to witness the first. The relay keeps its perfect second, but the world declines to follow. The rasp becomes a flat continuous scrape. The needle walks to the wall of the dial and stays there. The worst behavior an instrument can show certainty without motion. Measure first or lie forever. The thought lands with a judge's weight. A voice breaks from the wireless ocean, flat and practical, the cadence of a clock with wings. Off chalks on schedule, fuel on board, checklist complete, arm in air, airspeed steady, altitude steady, turbulence light, crew calm, no adjectives, only sequence. It speaks of steps taken in order and steps ready to repeat. It does not care what the blast will mean. It cares that the cycle turns and returns. He measures again, swaps probes, changes cables. Nothing relents. Counts arrive like boots down a corridor, regular and indifferent. Last winter's paper rises to defend him, no such device before a later year, not with their tempo, not from one airplane. One airplane is nuisance, not doctrine. The figures refuse the old map. Today is earlier than theory. Throughput has outrun pride. An engine has taught physics to keep time. He presses the pencil harder. The tip snaps graphite dust, freckling the chart. He feels shame, try to masquerade as skepticism. If he clings to doubt now, the lie will have his signature. He wipes the dust with the back of his hand and looks toward the window he will not open. Far away, the air is clean and ordinary. Here the instruments shout without voice. The wireless closes its loop bomb away, turn for home engines nominal. The relay ticks its loyal, second polite and useless. He watches the pin needle and understands the shape of the hour. Kraft believed control would last until proof arrived. Cadence arrived as proof. Time has changed allegiance. Kraft versus cadence. The blame does not live in a pilot's turn or a gunner's hesitation. It lives in a factory calendar and in a doctrine that mistook elegance for power. In Tokyo, the instruments still smell of dust and warm varnish. The meters announce themselves with a harsh electrical rasp, a dry tearing that rides over the steady tick of the relay. The sound is not emotion, it is a schedule asserting itself. A city has been measured by an engine that keeps time better than any man with a slide rule. For years, the boast sounded reasonable. The Allies build crude things, heavy things, wasteful things. They drown problems in metal and fuel because they cannot reach perfection. That sentence dies under the weight of sequence. Ore becomes gas. Gas becomes product. Product becomes core. Core travels under guard to an island runway. A bomber leaves its chalks on a number that matches yesterday's number. A bomb crew arms the device in the air because steps were written to allow it. None of it is beautiful. All of it is obedient. The line does not care about pride. The line cares about flow. A contemptuous memory tries to stand one more time. Their machines are overbuilt. Their crews are checklists with boots. Their science is a carpenter's hammer. The meter answers with another electric rasp, faster now, like sand poured across copper. Precision is not the hero here. Availability is. Availability turns the unknown into a departure time, converts theory into a shipping label, bolts physics to a propeller hub, and tells it to report back before midnight. Labor and material costs, once served the perfection story, hand-fit parts, polished tolerances, scarce specialists who guarded craft with ritual. That worship produced devices that hated the battlefield because the battlefield hated delay. Across the ocean, a different faith grew. Simpler assemblies multiplied. Training moved from artistry to reproducible action. Repair turned into replacement. The airframe became a platform for logistics rather than a shrine for pilots. Engineers wrote procedures that assumed failure would occur and arranged the day so that failure would be irrelevant by the next cycle. Instruments do not honor dignity. The needle climbs and pins the worst kind of certainty while the mind gropes for loopholes. Perhaps the counter is wrong. Swap the head, the rasp remains. Reduce the range. The rasp thickens. Step away from the bench and listen to the building. Breathe telephones, popping bicycle bells on the street paper, sliding under doors. All of it seems to belong to a lighter world. Return to the bench and accept the border that divides that light from this hour. Numbers can be tendered as mercy or as sentence. Here they arrive as sequence counts on a bomber line, fuel drums tallied by the platoon pallets, moving from states no one in this room has seen to an island many cannot pronounce. The old doctrine expected mastery of variables to precede action. The new doctrine ties variables to time and then crushes them with repetition. Today's device is the child of yesterday's device and the parent of tomorrow's. It can be assembled by people who never met the designer. It can be replaced faster than it can be repaired. It is not a miracle. It is a routine. Eyes fall to a photograph of a factory floor rivet, guns, cranes, men and women in coveralls, spaced like notes on staff paper. There is rhythm in the image, not grace. Rhythm wins wars because rhythm can be scaled. One plant becomes three. One airfield becomes a lattice. One squadron becomes a composite group, whose name reads like a punch card. The flight log speaks in short indifferent pulses. Off chalks climb, level arm release, turn home. The cadence is not cruel. The cadence is indifferent, which is worse for those who built their hopes on being special. The mind tries to move the battle back to familiar ground. Precision bombing disputes, fighter escort ratios, a new gun sight that buys one more chance. But the field has shifted. The decisive figure is not the angle of approach. It is the hours between one completed core and the next. The decisive taste is not cordite. It is the dry smell of packing crates. The decisive image is not a duel. It is a conveyor. That is why one bomber can erase a sector. Not because it is singular, but because it belongs to a cycle that does not fatigue. A technician's hands tremble while changing a film badge. The shame is not in the tremor. The shame is in the revelation that tremor or no tremor, the cycle will continue. A single scientist can doubt. A line cannot. The industrial divorce is complete emotion on one side of the glass, throughput on the other. Perfection kept its vows to craft and lost its custody of time. The other side married time and won the power to decide when a city begins and when it ends. The relay ticks its loyal second. The electrical rasp rides over it like surf over stones. Breath settles into a new pattern, smaller and quicker, the body's attempt to keep pace with a schedule it did not choose. The admission forms without ornament. This was never a contest between crude and refined. It was a contest between slow certainty and fast sufficiency. Slow certainty writes careful papers. Fast sufficiency writes itineraries. One of them reached the Ota River today. He starts with what never fails him. Isolate, vary record. A courtyard 50 paces across offers a controlled path for the team. The probe will cross tiles at measured intervals. Assistants will swap film badges on the minute. Paper tags will record wind temperature barometric drift. He sketches the sequence twice, so the hands learn the path before the feet do. The first traverse reads, clean counts rise with approach to the river bend, fall behind a brick wall, rise again along an open lane. The numbers form a shape that pleases the part of him that believes shapes can be owned. By the second traverse, the city starts answering back with confusion. A gust lifts ash and throws stray activity into the probe's mouth. A collapsed roof sheet acts like a mirror for invisible grit. The needle leans and stays. He lowers the range. The needle punishes that hope by climbing faster. A third traverse adds one more variable he did not invite. Heat haze turns distance into a rumor. Assistants call out figures. He repeats them, handwriting phrase as the pace rises. The electric rasp dulls into a nearly solid scrape, that refuses to give him the relief of separate clicks. The instrument has been turned from a counter into a siren. He retreats to an alley to rebuild order. A control reading under heavy masonry should give him zero drift. It gives him almost none, then suddenly too much, then a sulking return. He swaps the tube head. He changes the cable. He switches the meter entirely. The same swarming answer comes back as if the city itself has learned how to mock procedure. A thought intrudes like a stone in a shoe, even if the formula is right. Will it matter if there is no time left to prove that it is right twice? A report filters in from the rail station, a single bomber, again over the sea, another formation, lifting from a field he cannot name in a state he has never seen. The breathing inside his mask goes short. The day he imagined as a clean laboratory arc has become a corridor with doors slamming in both directions. The idea of replication, holy word protective charm, shrinks to a wish. He draws a circle around the number that should be the start of a yield estimate and sees his pencil halt at the edge of its own shadow. They carry a portable ion chamber to a shaded porch and repeat the traverse with slow dignity as if calm could reassert authority over particles. Readings swing high with no children, no rain, no movement to blame. He checks the watch face he trusts more than he trusts his pulse. Minutes go at their appointed human speed. Somewhere beyond the coast, hours move differently. The mind tries one last defense. If he can identify and remove 3 variables, the rest will fall into line. The city delivers 20 variables. In exchange, water flow, roof angle, soil content, tile glaze, debris chemistry, wind eddies, surface temperature, soot density, and more that do not have names. He can write fast enough. A logistics officer arrives with a sheet that smells of ship paint and salt. The ink lists departures, loads, arrivals, turnaround targets, refuel allotments, crew rest minimums. Every line is short. Every line carries a time. The officer does not speak of courage. He speaks of meeting the evening window. The sheet does not argue. It moves. At the margin of that page, his careful arcs of radiation and distance look like calligraphy from a dead century. He tries a field test that ought to sing a stacked plate setup with known shields and gaps positioned against a brick corner whose mass he measured by hand when the building still stood whole. The first exposure agrees with the table from last winter. Relief rises like cool water. The second exposure, identical in posture and ritual, comes back heavy by a punishing factor. He checks the stopwatch, checks the shadows, checks his own voice for a tremble that might have rushed a count. The third exposure refuses to be taken because the probe pegs at the instant he unboxes it, as if the air itself has decided to remove the courtesy of sequence. The assistants look to him for the old answer, one more run, and the scatter will fall into a pattern. He almost gives it, then swallows it, because the hour has become an enemy. Trucks rattle past with crates of masks and canteens, men on the tailgate tapping metal in a tempo that does not match the relay on his bench. The city's noise has turned into a form of pressure. Even his handwriting widens as if trying to breathe. Behind his annoyance lives a simple conversion that will not leave. If one bomber can depart, deliver, and return with this routine, then the next can be readied before his lab can stabilize a method. If a core can be assembled to a checklist, then another can be created while he is still arguing with a wind shift. The decisive figure is no longer the elegance of a curve. The decisive figure is the time between one finished engine of heat and the next. He begins to see his own discipline from above, a beautiful orchard that cannot feed a city because harvest arrives once late. A last attempt at control pushed the team back to the courtyard, run the grid at half speed, accept only numbers that recur twice within a narrow band. The first lane obliges. The second lane betrays. The third lane is interrupted by a call that tastes like iron, more movement at altitude. He writes without lifting the pencil and realizes he has drawn a straight line through 3 boxes that should have been separate. The page looks honest anyway. It looks like what the day has done to everything he used to trust. Breath settles into quick, small parcels. He stares at the meters as if they owe him apology. They owe him nothing. A relay ticks an obedient second. The scrape rides over it in one continuous sheet. He understands the new rule without needing to say it out loud. A perfect experiment means nothing inside a cycle that can repeat missions faster than a scientist can repeat tests. The work is not wrong, it is late. Discipline brought into a city timed by factories has turned into sacrifice with no purchase. The alley is a corridor of shade and grit. He has the team hold position while he counts his breath to steady the pen. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. The relay, in his satchel, keeps its perfect second as if the world can still be taught to behave. The meters lie on a crate like quiet animals. He rests the probe on stone to kill hand tremor and sets a new sheet under the clip. The electrical rasp comes back without warning, harsh and dry, a tearing along the edge of the air. It is not a click now. It is a single continuous scrape that swallows the obedient tick of the relay. Assistants glance over their masks at the same time. No one asks the obvious question because the answer has been shouting for an hour. He wants the old rule to save him, isolate very record, but the sound has its own doctrine, and it does not negotiate. A telephone runner arrives with a slip that smells of sweat and carbon. The text is simple and cruel. New overflight reports more departures from far fields, a pattern of readiness that does not wait for argument. He feels the change inside his chest, as if someone squeezed the bellows and forgot to release. 130 beats a minute is a number he does not write, but his body writes it for him. The breath cadence breaks. He draws in air in small nicks because large breaths cannot find room. He looks at the column of figures that will not settle into a curve. He looks at the sky and imagines a machine sliding through it like a metronome on rails. He looks at the assistants whose eyes shine with a faith he taught them. Measure first or lie forever. The line sits in his mind like a judge who has already chosen a sentence. He hears another long electrical rasp, ride the courtyard, and the shame arrives with it. Hot as fever, he has run out of time to deserve the certainty he demands. The pencil breaks. A dry snap between forefinger and thumb, graphite dust stippling the paper. He does not pick up the stub. He does not apologize for the sound. He hears his voice before he feels permission to speak. He tells the nearest officer the words he swore to withhold until they could be proven twice. It is atomic. He repeats it so that the sentence becomes an order rather than a guess. The officer writes without comment and leaves boots slapping grit the note, already a signal that will turn into actions he cannot predict. For an instant, he wants to reverse the noise he just made. He wants to call the runner back and add the savings clause that would keep his oath intact. Probable, likely, consistent with. He does not. Speed has taken custody of the day, and there is nothing in his pocket that can ransom it back to caution. He tells the team to collect the film, to mark the plates, to pack the tubes, to photograph the shadows on the steps again with the rule in frame. He hears a thinness in his own instructions and hates it because he once spoke like stone. The alley stinks of ozone and sun-baked dust. A gust lifts ash that tastes metallic on the tongue. He rubs his thumb and index finger together and feels grit grind like fine sandpaper. The meters maintain their merciless posture. The lead walls that ought to quiet them fail to deliver mercy. The scrap of sky above the eaves looks too clean for the day beneath it. Far off a transport clatters and downshifts. Closer a cartwheel ticks against a cracked paving stone. These small, durable sounds should be consolations. They are not. They mark a continuity that his work can no longer claim. He watches an assistant try to reassert ritual. The young man labels a tag with a deliberate handprints, straight letters, cleans the probe tip with a fold of untouched gauze. The gesture is perfect. It is also irrelevant. The rhythm beyond the city is the only rhythm that matters. Depart, climb, level, arm, release, turn, home, repeat. That rhythm does not mock him. It ignores him. Being ignored is worse than being opposed when your life has been built on the premise that precision commands respect. A voice on the radio cuts through with that factory calm. Departure windows, loadouts, turnaround targets, crew rest, weather over water. Every line is short. Every line carries time like a fuse. He had believed that to name and control the variables was to own the fight. Today, the variables belong to a system that treats them as line items on a log, and the line moves while he is still shaping sentences. He hears the steady second of the relay and understands that the second is no longer his. He thinks of the long winter evenings at the bench, the polished tolerances, the pride of hand-fit assemblies that sang when touched. The memory does not comfort, it accuses. The instruments did everything he asked of them, and he asked them to justify a world that vanished in a single flash. The discipline that once felt like armor now feels like a uniform no one recognizes. He had wanted proof to be a lantern. It is a shadow today, solid, as the outline burned into stone steps where a person once sat. The order he gave runs ahead of him, turning into radio chatter. He will not hear, and movement he will not see. He bumps his knee into the crate and feels a sting that anchors the body when the mind wants to flee. He tells the team to strip the grid down to essentials and leave a minimal spine of control points. The rest can be finished later, if later exists. A truck rumbles past, with crates of masks and canteens, metal ringing in a tempo he knows will reach the islands before his report can reach a printer. He finds another pencil and writes a single sentence on the top of the new sheet. The handwriting is too big. The tail of the last letter drags across the margin like fatigue. He does not cross it out. He folds the sheet and slides it into an envelope with film that carries more authority than any argument he can compose. The envelope is light. The envelope weighs as much as a city. He seals it with a press of his thumb and feels the glue grab like a small, petty victory. A young technician asks for one more traverse to tighten the confidence of the curve. He looks at the boy and sees himself 10 years younger and uninjured by speed. He could say yes, and by a dignity he does not need. He says no because the answer must be in motion before the next departure. He hears the electrical rasp one more time, steady and flat, a sheet of sound that admits no room between its grains. He nods as if to an adversary whose argument has been made well. He stands there with the envelope and the small ache in his chest and accepts the shape of the day. The shame is simple. He is late. The irrelevance is simpler. The world moved without him. He has broken his oath to keep faith with measurement, and it is the correct betrayal because survival has a clock and the clock is not his. He tells the runner to go. He does not watch him leave. He rests his hand on the bench and feels the wood, old and scarred, a surface that once promised control. The promise is gone. The bench remains. The meters whisper their dry tear along the edge of the air. He breathes in small measures and lets the second pass to its new owner. The room is a borrowed office with maps still pinned to the walls from a different war. The light comes in low and chalky, catching dust that floats like old arguments. On the table lie photographs of a bomber line, wings laid out like leaves, a fuselage turning on a cradle, hands that do not belong to this city, tightening bolts in a sequence that never hesitates. Next to the photographs sits a thin folder with a sketch of a bomb casing. The lines strict the curve of the nose drawn without romance. A third pile holds copies of assembly checklists, each step given its verb, each verb its box. He places his palms flat on the table to steady the tremor that still wants to write itself into the paper. An aide sets an enamel cup beside him and retreats without speaking. The cup's rim is chipped a white crescent missing from a blue ring. He lifts it and tastes metal and heat and something that used to be comfort. He lowers it carefully because the flat ring it will make on the photograph feels like a small violation he cannot afford. He tells himself there is nothing to violate. The men and women in these images have already done the only important thing. They have made an act into a routine. A staff officer enters, nods, stands at the window. He does not ask for feelings, only for facts that can be carried in the mouth without shaking. The scientist taps the checklists with a knuckle to make a hollow sound. The officer watches without moving. The scientist speaks in the grammar he once used for proofs. A device of this yield is not a miracle, it is a cycle. The officer writes that down in small square characters. The scientist adds another sentence that feels like swallowing a stone. Availability defeats precision because it controls time. The officer writes that down too. Neither of them look at the other while the words choose their weight. He opens the folder to the bomb sketch. The pencil work is clean, impatient, as if the hand that drew it had a train to catch. He follows the arc of the casing with his forefinger and feels the absence of ornament. No fillets cut to please a craftsman's pride, no flourish that begs for applause. Just volume, arranged to host heat. He runs his finger back along the seam line and stops where the note calls for screws, spaced at exact intervals as if the skin of the weapon must learn to count. He thinks of the evenings when he filed metal until the edges met like a handshake, and realizes the handshake never mattered to the sky. The photographs refuse to be mystical. They show a floor scabbed by used jigs that look like furniture cranes that do not shine. Men and women stand at stations that could be traded without drama. A foreman holds a clipboard and looks not at the airplane but at the line that will produce the airplane again tomorrow. He imagines stepping into that room and trying to explain the beauty of a curve only he can see. The room would nod and keep moving. The nod would be mercy and sentence at once. The aide brings a second envelope thinner than the first. Inside are two frames captured from a camera used on the island runway. The first shows a bomb truck nose in with a cradle, the load secured by straps that look like belts for a giant. The second shows a man in a cap guiding the transfer with one hand, while the other rests on the cradle as if soothing a horse. The man's face does not carry triumph or dread. It carries the easy focus of someone who has done this before and will do it again after a meal. The scientist places the two frames side by side and understands that repetition is the shape of this power. He thinks of the bench at home, the careful rituals that made the instruments feel like allies. He thinks of the care he took with glassware, the way he trimmed wicks, the way he aligned dials until the world returned to the angle he preferred. Each act felt like respect, paid toward a universe that would repay respect with clarity. The cost of those hours lies on the table in forms he can touch. The waste is not the learning. The waste is the expectation that learning alone could pace a factory. He breathes and lets the thought sit naked where he can no longer protect it with explanation. The officer turns from the window. When will you be prepared to state the yield, he asks, and whether there will be another? The scientist answers with numbers that carry their own shame. A band, not a point, and a probability that offends his training because it leans on the shape of a line he did not draw. He speaks about ore and separation and heat and weight, about shipping and climate, and the boredom of checklists that prevent miracles by preventing surprises. He keeps his voice flat so that the words can do their work without him. The officer folds the note and slides it into the inside pocket of his tunic. He asks for a sentence that can be carried to another room without losing shape. The scientist looks down at the photographs, at the casing sketch, at the checklists with their little empty squares, and says the only sentence that will survive the trip. Availability defeats precision because it controls time. He hears the room accept it. The room does not thank him. The room does not need to. He watches the officer leave and feels the space where dignity used to stand take one step back. When the door closes, the office exhales. He allows himself a glance at the clock and resents the second hand for its confidence. He takes the cup and drinks to the chip so that his lip finds the missing crescent and knows where to stop. He sets the cup down on the plain wood of the table instead of on the photographs. He moves the photographs to make way for the checklists and then moves the checklists to make room for the sketch. Nothing he arranges will matter to the next departure, but the hands insist on arranging because that is what they were trained to do. The aide returns to collect the folder. The scientist keeps the sketch for one breath longer, then lets it go. The paper is so thin he can feel the grain of the table through it. He asks for copies of the checklists to be left with him. The aide nods. He wants to study the verbs, the sequence, the limits on improvisation, the way each error path is captured and neutralized by the next step. He knows that none of this will let him outrun what is already in motion. He wants the shape of the system in his head anyway, not to honor the enemy, but to strip his own habits of their costume. He stands and gathers his notes. The hallway beyond smells of scorched paper and old polish. Footsteps pass, voices speak, in quick, purposeful lines, names of places and times pressed together. He had once believed that beauty could convince the world. He has learned that the world does not need convincing when it has a schedule. He carries the sentence he gave like an instrument that can never be turned off. Availability defeats precision because it controls time. It is a doctrinal admission, not a confession, and that makes it heavier. At the threshold, he pauses and looks back at the table. The photographs lie obediently where he left them. The sketch is gone. The checklists remain little ladders drawn on paper for people who do not care about ladders, only about reaching the next rung at the right second. He closes the door and walks toward the stairwell, counting steps without deciding to. The habit will not save him. It will keep him moving until the next order arrives. The waste sits behind him in quiet stacks, hours of craft that cannot pay for what one routine can buy in an afternoon. The last thing he hears before the stairwell swallows the hall is the ordinary murmur of a building doing its work. It is not cruel. It is indifferent. Indifference is the final tally. Morning finds him at the bench, with the meters quiet and the paper fresh, as if the day had decided to pretend ignorance. He does not accept the comfort. The relay ticks its second. He lets it pass without trying to own it. He writes the figures that matter now, not to rescue a pride that has already left the room, but to describe the engine that replaced it. Ore to gas. Gas to product. Product to core. Core to island. Island to city. None of those words ask to be admired. They ask to be counted. He thinks of the oath he broke and feels the old sting rise, then turn into something less sharp and more useful. The oath had been a shelter built for a slower storm. The storm that arrived did not negotiate, it scheduled. He sets down the sentence that will have to carry him forward, not as a boast, not as an apology, simply as a description that fits the shape of the war he has finally seen. Resource over time is the true balance. Resource divided by time is the only measure that decides which side owns the next hour. Resource, time throughput, is the true balance of war. The room holds still for that line. It belongs to no party. It does not love any flag. It explains why a single airplane can bend a month and why a city can be decided by a warehouse that never sees a map. He draws a small axis in the margin and watches the curve steepen where human hands learn to move as a line. He lists the variables that used to be kings and sees them shrink to servants under cadence, accuracy, bravery, craftsmanship. They still matter. They do not govern. A runner brings figures that smell of salt and fuel loadouts, turnaround windows, departure tempos, arrivals predicted against weather over water. The sheet is almost boring in its tidiness. He writes new conversions beside the columns, not to flatter the enemy, but to reduce mystery to a toolbox. Kilograms of refined product per hour into warheads completed per week. Warheads completed per week into sorties per day. Sorties per day into the number of cities that can vanish in a month if nothing interrupts the line. The numbers do not shout, they accumulate. Accumulation is the loudest sound in the world. He steps to the window. The city below is a study in edges, bright plains where roofs fell, faint silhouettes where bodies were at the moment light arrived. He knows the mind wants to turn this into a story about cruelty versus grace. That would feel better. It would also be a way to avoid the lesson. The lesson is not that brutality won. The lesson is that a culture learned to make complicated acts repeatable and accepted boredom as a weapon. He cannot defeat boredom with elegance. He can only match it with sequence or be ruled by it. The team waits for direction. He does not hand them a consolation. He hands them a procedure, consolidate control points, standardize the traverse, commit to fewer ranges that give reliable separation, file a daily log that can be learned by someone new in an afternoon. He hears his own voice and recognizes the cadence he had once dismissed. It feels like treason to past pride. It feels like survival to the part of him that still expects to see another season. He writes a final line in his notebook, so they will not have to guess what he means when he is not in the room. Refined kilograms per hour, sorties per day, cities per month. He underlines each arrow with a single stroke and closes the book on the soft thud of acceptance. This is not an equation for glory. It is an equation for control, and control follows time. A bell rings somewhere in the building, ordinary and local. He lets it mark the second for him. The meters breathe quietly. He slides the notebook into its sleeve and stands, feeling the familiar weight of fatigue without the old bitterness. The fear he carried all week does not leave. It changes shape until it can be carried without shaking. He walks to the door with the knowledge that craft still matters where it fits inside cadence, and that love of perfection is safe again once time has been paid. Perfection waited for proof. Availability shipped on time. Time chose the winner.